art matters. As some of you would know, recently we restructured this from a panel discussion to a conversation with an important artist. And today you have a conversation with Amitav Das, and the conversation will be carried out by ROOBINA KARODE. JOGEN CHOWDHURY, who had also, in fact, volunteered to be here, is held up somewhere in Europe and is not able to make it. So that's what it is. So it will be conversation. And the rules of the games simply are that the job of ROOBINA KARODE is to make Amitav Das talk. At the end of the conversation, there will be some time for the members of the audience to offer brief comments or ask questions or clarifications or whatever. As you know, this series is organized by the Raza Foundation in collaboration with the India International Center. And we have almost completed 4 years, I think, of this series. And, well, it has gone on, and hope that it goes on. The Raza Foundation is, as you know, created by and funded exclusively by the Master Syed Haider Raza, who unfortunately is very critically ill. He is in the ICU for 2 months and showing some signs of improvement, but they can be deceptive. So actually I just came from the hospital a short while ago. As you know, he would have loved to be here. Every time it was possible for him to be here, he has attended these sessions in spite of his age. I need not introduce Amitav Das. I mean, you know him very well, that's why you are here. And you know ROOBINA KARODE also. He is an important painter, and I saw some of his later works recently, and I found that there was an element of playfulness with forms, which is very interesting. And usually those who paint in the abstraction have this either freedom or problem how to play with forms and to create and discover new meanings. ROOBINA KARODE, as you know, is an important art critic and curator, and she has been running the Kiran Nadar Museum to much glory, and she has organized and curated some very important exhibitions in recent years. Well, in the Art Matters next month, on 17th of August, there will be a conversation with Shubha Mudgal, the musician, the vocalist, and S. Kalidas will be in conversation with her. We have a Kelucharan Mahapatra Memorial Lecture on the 10th of August, which will be delivered by Kumudni Lakhya, the well-known Kathak Doyen. She will be talking about Kathak in our times. In September, on 10th of September, we'll have Dayakrishna Memorial Lecture, 8 Threats to Freedom of Expression, and this will be delivered by Ramchandra Guha, the historian. We are organizing, starting an annual series of disciples of important gurus in music, classical music and classical dance, and we're calling it Uttaradhikar. And it is a 2-day festival, which will be a 3-day, 18th to 20th of October. And you will see and hear disciples of Odissi dancer Sujata Mahapatra, Bharatnatyam dancer Malavika Sarukai, Kathak dancer Prerna Shimali, Drupad singer Uday Bhavalkar, Rudraveena Star Bahauddin Dagar, and Khayal Satyashil Deshpande. They will not be performing, but these gurus will be presenting their own disciples. So you are most welcome to these. This will take place, of course, in the India Habitat Center, as also the memorial lectures take place in the India Habitat Center. Art Matters takes place here. So there you are, and now you have, the floor is ROOBINA, KARODE, and AMITAVA Das.
The kind of work is registered, then we just do.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, friends, for being here. It's such a delight to see all of you. And I'm delighted to see all of you here this evening, and so would Amitabh be. And I hope that you will add to the conversation, which is not going to just be between both of us, but Ashok ji is here, and all of you would add to it. Chronological sequencing of Amitabh's works, that would be impossible to do in the time we have. But if you pay a little more attention, you will see that it runs through many of his ways of working, which is what the idea was. And it starts from his early works and comes almost to what he is doing now, which is working on magazine, glossy magazine sheets.
चलने दो चेंज नहीं हो रहा मैं कर रहा हूँ अच्छा ठीक है आप करिए
या थोड़ा धीरे धीरे वापस जाइए 2-3 स्लाइड्स, वो इम्पोर्टेंट थी वो। हाँ, मटेरियल का यूज़
जो आप बोलें तब करूँगा नेक्स्ट बैक आ गए
बस ठीक, अब चलिए। Thank you. Question.
Yes.
Which would be just going directly to your formal schooling in art. And I would like to know from you what was happening in terms of art curriculum.
Actually, first, when I cleared my school, hello, when I cleared my school, then my parents wanted me to join, not to art school, but to some courses like paying things. So I joined this commerce. But after 1 year, I left it because I was, that was not my thing. So first, I was also thinking of joining architecture. But then I decided to join art school. And actually my education, art education started by seeing things, by visiting exhibitions, etc. Like when I was in school, I used to visit exhibitions. I remember one very great French exhibition came. In that, the works from 15th century tapestry to the 20th century works were there, like Picasso's original, Braque and all these. And this exhibition was held in 1962 in Ravindra Bhavan. And literally I touched some of the works like Braque and Picasso just to have that vibration. Though I am seeing the original work in front of me, and I touched some of the works. So that was, the education started from that. And on the other hand, there was a very good bookshop, Galgotia and Sons in Connaught Place. They used to keep all those pocket books of art. That time so many publications are not there. So they used to keep all those pocket books on European art and American art. And also, I also became interested in poetry. And that bookshop actually, all the poetry books were available from like French poets, Spanish or English. I was not much interested though in English poets, but other European poets. So like I encountered the Blue Period book of Picasso first time in that Galgotti and Sons and Miro. And that time I was not very much aware. So there was a monograph on Miro, small pocket booklet. So it was written, say, about 10 years period work. No, I thought such a young, such a child can make such this kind of work. I thought that was his birth and it's written. No? So like that it started, my education. And in the school, in the College of Art, I used to do whatever as per the syllabus. I used to do that type of academic work also, and for studies. And on the other hand, I used to carry my own work. Like I didn't have that much space, so I used to do works on paper, drawings and things in a small space. So I was carrying on all those works on my own. That is apart from my school education, art school education. And like after a year or so, when I was almost finishing first year, then one day principal told me that you have to show your sketchbook to the final year students. Then he called all the final year students to see my sketchbooks.
Which was the one you...
Which was my own thing, not the part of the art school curriculum. So it started like that.
I remember you telling me once that you vividly recalled meeting F.N. Souza.
Yeah,
and when was then and what happened in that meeting?
Like I told you, I used to visit exhibitions. So Souza was having a show at Sridhani Gallery in 1965. So he came with a tall wife, young teenager wife. He came to the show and I was just going through his exhibitions, and that time I was also collecting autographs from artists, different artists. So I took out my small autograph book, and I told him to sign or whatever. Then he just turned me on and he put that autograph book on my shoulder and he drew a head and gave it to me.
Okay. As I understand, and if I go back in time, you were raised in Simla?
Yeah, in my childhood I was raised in Simla because my father was working in some government department over there. So Simla has, that our house was also situated in between, not in the, like from our house, you could see the valley as well as the mountain, in the hills. So, and also it came naturally to me, so I used to roam around and things like that. And one day when I got up from, bed in the morning, suddenly I saw I am still dreaming or what? Because everything was white, snowfall. That was the first snowfall I encountered. So, and that sense of space and things, that time I didn't understand all those things, but now I can see that those Simla things has got connection with my work.
They do.
In terms of space.
And that you were more of a haptic child, isn't it? That you were experiencing and looking at things not so much analytically, but more emotionally and psychologically.
No, emotionally in the sense, like more naturally. Like when we see a tree or a flower, we don't analyze. First we get the reaction, or it is natural, natural with human being. Not to analyze things in the first hand or to find out the reason. So like I believe that in art also there is no reason. There should not be any reason for art.
That's true. No, but were you observing I think the point that I'm making is it was not so much about observation as much as about emotionally being drawn to certain kinds of things and spaces, which also become a part of your work later on. So let me just take it a little ahead, and I think what I was very interested when I first looked at your works was you had these many sketchbooks and diaries, which really fascinated me. And in this book, which was published by the Delhi Art Gallery of Amitav Das, I have written an essay which is only looking at your sketchbooks, isn't it? And I find that very interesting because looking at those pieces of sketchbooks and diaries, which were very small in size, I got interested in understanding Amitava's interest in drawing as his language. And if you go through the books, you have a very interesting thing. A page of diary becomes like, it traverses across space and time. He's able to bring lines with text. He writes, he draws and writes, he writes and draws. And he develops a vocabulary of dots, squiggles, dashes, which is very interesting in the way that he developed his language of drawing. And a lot of it is all freehand gesturing of the creative act. Would you like to talk a little bit about this, about your drawing?
Like I used to draw anywhere or whatever, in any material. That time all those good drawing papers were not available.
Yes.
So I used to draw on every material, like at that time. No, before that actually, like in 1972 to 74, I made drawings which were very much like introvert kind of drawings. And in that thing, it was mainly pen and ink, but I developed a kind of technique, it develops automatically. So like I used to draw things or figures or tree, whatever, with lines. And then I used to eliminate them. The lines I used to eliminate. So I used to fill up the white spaces with the strokes of the pen. So in that process, I used to eliminate the lines and the other surface used to appear. So that was in up to 1974.
How
And
did you eliminate, sorry?
eliminate means like I drew a form. So then I used to I won't be able to say that I used to distort the things. I used to add the elements by filling up the space.
Space, okay.
So in between, then the white line remained, and the original line, dotted line or line with the pen, it disappeared.
Yeah, so I think what I'm trying to hint at is that you, through innumerable drawings, actually arrived at a visual script. It was almost like a scripting of which was visually your hand was moving and creating a script, which was full of notations, which had scribbles, which had doodles, which had dashes in a particular line, or something going in and giving a monolithic form to something like a personal handwriting. So I would say. Yeah.
Actually, that thing came after this 1974 series. In 1975, I joined for 1 year to teach at Jamia Millia.
Right.
So I used to travel through Ring Road, and that time I used to see the fields. And that reminded me of my Shimla days. So then I started, like from interior to I came out in the open space, in my work also.
Yes.
So I started using elements like wind or the cloud or the field with the help of those dashes and dots and horizontal lines and the vertical lines. Those were the structure. Those are not regular kind of landscape, but it was more like innovative landscape through those dashes and dots and things like that. And that becomes my kind of script, what you are referring to.
I'm just referring to Miro because Miro once expressed that it is signs that have no exact meaning that provide a sense of magic. And in your work, there is this whole play of the enigmatic. Every mark and every mark making is developed in such a way, and I think I will talk about this even later. Even when I look at your works, I feel the beauty is that the technique is totally inscrutable. The technique doesn't follow a method. It becomes inscrutable, and therefore it creates the enigmatic things that it creates on paper. And that's something very interesting to me because that's what I think that's where your work becomes, work develops a compelling presence. But let me just take you a little ahead, and I'm going to talk about again these drawings. Somewhere there is use of calligraphic kind of work. Somewhere you also create very decorative arabesques forms, which are organic and more spiral, and somewhere like an alphabetical writing or a lettering that comes in. And I get this sense that you work through you have a very instinctive approach towards these drawings, which are, even when you labor, the laboring of that drawing, it looks like very playful. For instance, a lot of what we saw in the works, you almost are threading lines like somebody threading embroidery with needle. They go like this, it just goes on, and it just creates, if you want something dense to really, a relief kind of thing to come out, or a volume to be created, you just create it. Okay? Now, this must be really inspiring, because what happens gradually in your work is from just doing drawings, you start moving and shifting towards what I called at some point collaged drawings, which was the show that you did at Al-Qazi's in 1997, which was on rice paper and tempera. But what was interesting about this show was, and I'd written the text, was that Amitabh was actually now collaging his drawings. Collaging his drawings, and when I say collaging, it became very interesting because though the work was just this much, you became like someone who could really fill in a lot of things. And in these works, what I found interesting is that perhaps in the 70s, I don't know, in the 70s and 80s, there must be an emergence and a preference for mixed media happening in India, you know, where a lot of artists were really moving towards giving up this loyalty to a single medium, if you want to put it that way, and trying to really bring in a lot of different kind of materials and techniques into one thing to become more expressive or to really communicate in certain ways. And this is something that we see in those collage drawings. And what was very interesting for me is, which you must talk now, is you have put in bus tickets, you have put in stamps, you have put in stickers, you have put in soap wrappers, and it really acts like as if you have frozen time and space as you were going through it, perhaps traveling, and it were your portable works or whatever. There was a portability about these small works. And so please talk a little bit about this.
These drawings happened mainly in 90s. Like I call them travelogues, you know. So for my work, I used to travel, you know, abroad, like an exhibition designer. I used to go here and there, and that time that globalization was not there. So we have our own different kind of labels or tickets and things. And when I encountered all those things like a bus ticket or a metro ticket or labels, it really fascinated me, and I used to collect them, and I started using them because you don't need any much space and for anything like that, or you don't have to organize things to create those works. So I started directly working on them then and there only. So I started pasting those tickets or whatever, and I used to give meanings to them, like by drawing, by creating some lines, or by putting a dot of color and things like that. So that way it becomes a kind of travelogue. I made a whole lot of things in that fashion, like this collage. It's actually a napkin and things, and it is just pin. It's not even pasted that way. So then I discovered these elements very interesting. And also you are referring use of collage and things. So I saw like Jairam Patel's burnt wood, or Jyotivat's nails, and Subramaniam's stands. You know, he used to paste them, and so that thing was started, and that also gave me a kind of freedom to use different kind of material I mean, unconventionally I started doing works like that.
But let me digress a little bit. I just want to touch upon Rabindranath Tagore, because all of us, we were when we were studying, and even later on, have gone back to his doodles. And it's very interesting that when he used to write his poems, and whenever he made some mistakes, he used to do them as an act of camouflage, isn't it? We all know that. And that act of camouflage then became an aesthetic act in the work. I want to know from you, what has been your inspiration from Tagore?
This process itself, inspired me. As I said, I used to, in the doodles in the sense, I used to do lines and things, then I used to correct them, I used to camouflage them rather, in that sense. So that process became more interesting thing to me. Of course, the Tagore's forms and drawings emerged very strongly and in a very poetic sense. But that process, because I won't be able to draw like Tagore, because only that process inspired me.
But in your case, you have gone a step further in a very different way, because your act of camouflaging especially in these works, has been about layering. You have been layering rice paper, you have been creating layers in a way that you want a hide and seek kind of play between your things, between the things you have buried or embedded within the paper and put something on up or layered it, and you don't want to completely hide what is in it. And your lines, as you rightfully said, become like connectors. They become a bridge, or they become, a kind of a connector to the different things, the disparate elements that you have put onto the work to create that kind of, to really express what you finally want to communicate. For instance, if you want to communicate man in disharmony, or something like urban chaos, or any other thing, it just comes out in the way that you would really put all these elements together. So gluing, sticking, layering, and stitching, and all that has become part of your technique now, or part of your methodology, which is much more, I think, inventive rather than academic or studied. It's not studied, it is much more hands-on. You work with, and as you go along, you create your methods of working. And if you don't like something, as you said, you could actually camouflage it further, and that's how the reliefs and the layers come about. And I find that that became a really a very interesting way for you to work. In fact, it enters even your larger works later. Yeah. Okay, it doesn't remain only to the small formats that you did then. Okay, so I quite like the idea of not just going through a drill, or just talking about skill as practice, but also skill as something that you can discover or invent as you work, okay, and then learn about it in terms of, in a very hands-on way. So I'll come to a very, I think this is a question which even the audience would love to ask you, or rather give us comments on. Quite a few writers have considered human figure as to be the central premise of your practice. And over the years, as I keep looking at your work, I feel that it is neither about figuration, it's neither completely about abstraction, it is somewhere else. It's in a third space. Maybe you can correct me on that, or maybe you can give your view on that, because then I will ask you what I need to ask.
I would like to say that I was never interested in retinal value of art in art. Like I was not really interested to do naturalistic art or things like that. So because I was also influenced with music and poetry in my work, it is there. Suppose this layering is also like a note is coming out from a sitar or vocal, then you also just take it further, and then also you come back. So this process, like I painted something figurative, then I, like that thing is there, that element is there, then again I started another layer because of that notations. It also like that. And also I never think that painting should be a statement, or it should not be overstated. So that way I had a show, it was called You Shall Remain Hidden,
Yes.
By Epicurus thing. So like suppose I cried, or my sound was too much, then I used to correct that sound. So by layering the things to subdue it. So then the new elements emerged. So that becomes a work of art.
But do you believe in this divide? Because I mean, there are so many discourses and writings which are all around only abstraction and figuration in India. We seem to have some kind of an anxiety about it, If you are not a figurative painter, then there's a problem, If you're not, the dominant discourse is figuration, and so abstraction walo ko piche bhej do, udhar rakh do, I mean, there is something like, if you go through the history as, of how modern Indian art has, evolved, you always come to read about figuration or narrative, figurative as the dominant discourse, and everything else being a little on the side. My question is, whenever you put anything in the form of a painting or a drawing which is on a two-dimensional surface, isn't it already abstraction?
Of course, I mean, in figurative work or pure non-representational work, that notion of abstraction or that element is very, very important. It is not you are not copying, suppose a figure or a tree, you are not copying a tree, you know that, but you are creating your own tree. So then you have to have a different kind of language. And also this figuration and abstraction, I think it has become more market related things, you know, and that has become really confusing. Not like you cannot say Tagore's work is totally figurative or abstract. The real thing is lies somewhere else. You cannot categorize everything. You cannot categorize, you know, art or in the sense like nowadays, in that sense, there are progressives and contemporary art, which is again very confusing. Contemporary art it's referred to the younger lot, and progressive or the newer things is referred to the, you know, earlier. So that thing is also again confusing. So, like I can tell you a story, real story, which Satish Gujral told me. Like he was preparing in 1970s or 80s. He was preparing 80s, I think. He was preparing a show for New York, in Forum Gallery. Then he prepared non-figurative things, and he used all those calligraphic. So he took that show there, and he was preparing it for the last 2 years. When he reached there, then he realized, oh, now this now is the trend of figurative art.
That's what I'm saying.
So he said, oh, mera to kuch galti ho gaya. Then again he started preparing another show, and he took all those figurative works. That time again it changed. It becomes all non-representational. So it's all, you know, trends. These trends, things are actually not part of this real art.
Yeah, because just think about a legendary artist like A.G. Subramaniam, who just recently passed away. And even till the end, I think 6 months ago or 10 months ago when I met him, he was still telling me, I paint everything from life. Okay. He just had a single sentence to say, and he would just, I'm painting life, you know, what I feel, what I sense, what I see, what I do. And I myself in my own writings have been thinking so much about this. Why is it that these categories, where did they come from? Why did they become so important? For instance, I mean, an artist can be, let's say, I was struck by one of your sentences that I wrote in my diary. The story in my work starts with the viewers, is what you said. We talked to the viewers and asked them later, have you ever felt any anxiety about, you made the statement,
no,
but have you felt any anxiety about it?
No, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Our whole Indian tradition of whole Indian art, history of Indian art is based on narration.
Okay.
It was always narrative,
Yes.
you know. But narrative things are always there in a different form. Like now, my art is not narrative in the direct sense, but narration starts when I finished my work. I don't start from narration point of view. So then it starts with the viewer, even with me. After finishing my work, narration starts from there, not earlier. No.
But sadly, what has happened in the due course of time, you know, is that whether artists or critics or curators, I curate shows, you do work, artists put up their works, the first thing that audience asks you is, as soon as they come into an exhibition, before even they're familiarized with the work or engaged it for even 1 second, first thing they'll ask you, ये काम के बारे में जरा बताइए, explain this work. The experience is totally overruled. We don't believe that art is an experience at all. We always want to explain and put words and, you know, music के लिए कोई ये नहीं कहेगा, film में कोई नहीं कहेगा, but when it comes to art, the moment you see, even if you can see a crow and a tree and a figure and a fragmented limb and this, they will still ask you, can you explain fully what this work is about? Okay, I have moments of frustration because my attempt is to not really to handhold, but to make them see that, okay, just see it like you see the world. If you cannot open your eyes to the world, you cannot open your eyes to art. You know, if you're not using yourself, you know, you're not wanting to sense, feel, have any kind of thing touch you, it's not really going to do much for you. The question then rises, what happens to works like yours or practices like yours where a lot of it is not about proving a point or giving a statement, as you said, political statement, socially engaged art. You can keep on talking about many of those terms. Can art not be non-intellectual, non-ideological, non-political? What is it? What do you think about this?
I tell you, in our country, we have progressed, like we are ruling, at least in IT world and things like that, ruling the world. But our visual education is totally nil. That's why people ask, okay, explain me, what is the meaning of it? This kind of absurd thing they always ask. They may be highly IT professional, you know, they are great scientists and things, but they are totally nil in this approach, you know. And on the other hand, even in the West also, so many things through words, this revolution happened, no, like this American abstractionist or expressionist. Tom Wolfe wrote a book that is, the title was The Painted Word. You know, even Jasper Jones made a work, that title was The Critic, and he made an ear. You know, that was, I mean, you have to hear and then, so that there also, it is not that there, it was not there. But still they are much more aware visually. And on the other hand, you ask a child to enjoy, like you tell him to stand in front of a painting, he will enjoy thoroughly. He will tell you. It is not intellectualism, or you don't have to find out the source, whether it is political or social. From pure point of view, like when we hear the music, people don't ask, what is the meaning of it? You know, naturally they react, they encounter things. But in visual art, I don't know why this is happening.
Isn't it very difficult?
Very difficult.
It's so it's really complex.
It has become a complex situation, rather.
It is, sometimes even when you sit with artists and talk to them, you find very difficult to really, you understand that the artist is transacting the entire world experience visually in his work, you know, bringing it. But if you have to say, if you have to really talk about it, you know, you always are wondering, you know, what is the way to really talk about certain works. For instance, I have had experiences when Nasreen Mohammadi's exhibition was on, you know, if you didn't tell her story, there would be some who would really be drawn and completely taken aback and bowled over by her lines. You know, they could understand that it is impossible unless the person is completely immersed in this experience. One could not draw 260 baselines and 50 diagonals and then other layer and this layer and that layer and then create a maze or a labyrinth which really leaves you wondering, and that would be just an artist's way of trying to make labyrinths and escape the labyrinths or whatever, her own thing, let us say her own thing. But it's really, it makes you understand, is that the reason why non-objective, non-representational, whatever the term, that kind of art does not really, has a select audience, or rather leaves people much more wondering how to really make entry into this work, how to really relate to it, why can't just they enjoy the pleasure of it, why can't they think about The way Amitabh works with any and every equipment that is in his hand, it could be a pencil, it could be a pen, it could be a croquil, it could be a bow pen, it could be a marker, you can go on, the toolbox never ends, you know.
Yeah.
The toolbox is constantly growing and everything is simultaneously being used. Because I was amazed by certain works that you did where you're using the graphite line and you're using the painterly line, and how the graphic and the painterly mediums are communicating with each other.
Also very commercial thing like permanent marker.
Yeah,
that
and
is also
yes,
I've used.
and something like people use white correction pen to erase. You're using it as the most embellishment, the most embellished technique is being done by the correction marker, where you're putting those white dots which come out of a correction pen. And for me, that itself is a real message to students and to people that, you know, art. If you say that art is this kind of a ground which frees you of many things, you know, which liberates you of so many of your inhibitions and your thing, then perhaps this is the way to look at it. That yes, all these things can be used. All these things are. I mean, there's nothing like this is aesthetic and that is anti-aesthetic, and this is something that is for art and this is not for art. The marker cannot be used for art and the column cannot be used for art. They all come together and they are your working tools, and something else creates out of that whole use of tools. But I don't think that it ends there. So quickly, I'm going to, before we open this up, because I'm sure there'll be some very interesting questions. What I'm noticing is also some of the titles of your works. They are fascinating. You are known to be a more reclusive character, somebody who lives in his own world, has friends but likes to be on his own. All those stories are there. If we go through your work also, there is always the presence of a solitary figure. And sometimes the solitary figure is left alone, suspended in an open field or open ground. That open ground could be a football ground where you see sometimes a figure, you know, overstretching himself and really creating, passing on the animated energy to the ground or taking that energy from the ground itself. And sometimes the figures become extremely, what should I call them, expressionistic. For instance, you had a work called Somalia. Okay, you have reduced the figure to a skeletal armature. Okay, you have painted him, or rather immersed him in a very, very intense saturated color field. Okay, and you give some hints of blood and soot and things that really unsettle the viewer. Would you like to talk a little bit about
Actually,
this? How you, yeah.
Some of the works I reacted very much, from the world situation or, the condition of humankind, like that. So, not many, but in many of my works, those reflections or those references are there. Like I painted at the same time of Somalia, I painted 3 canvases at that time. One was Somalia, one was My India.
Yes.
It was like this.
Yeah.
And one was River of Blood.
Yeah.
Too much blood was flowing at that time. That reflects the time or political situation of that time. Naxalism and all kinds of things, innocent people are killing. But I never approached or painted them directly. There are references and these are the elements or my reactions. I reacted like that. Somalia was really, people were dying out of starvation and things like that.
Yes.
So people, even they were not even animals or nothing, just, dying human being like a skeleton and things like that. So some of the works I almost direct references are there of my work.
But you also use very poetic titles from Lorca, from Rilke, from Jibananda Das?
No, I have
No?
not used.
But you have used his text somewhere?
No, not really, not directly. But like in that catalog, I have used many in 2003
Yeah.
and 2.
Yeah.
Like most of my works are from poets,
Yes.
from the poems of different poets, Kingsley Amis and things.
Yes.
You know, it is. I have
Takashi.
this Japanese poet.
I can see nothing, it's dark, there's nothing, I can see nothing. I entered your waters slowly, step by step. The sun
This
was
is-
witness when his eyes appeared. Okay. No, but certainly the language is getting to more fragmentation, dismemberment, and kind of spatial ruptures. You know, that is the kind of language that does come in those works of the 2000 time. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about that. You have worked in watercolors, gouaches, ink, acrylic, oil. Anything you can talk about? What is the medium that really drives you?
No, I get bored if I use one and only one material, you know. I enjoy using several materials. Sometimes, of course, I use them in a very limited sense, like those rice paper, gouache on rice paper or tempera on rice paper. And also I have used, of course, those collages and things like that underneath the rice paper and mounted on mount board. But I really enjoy combining different material in my work. So even in my canvases now, you can see the newspaper cuttings or this cotton wool.
These large canvases also have gauze dipped
Gauze
and
like they are like blood, no, blood
yes,
stains.
stains, yeah. And
Stains.
you have used cloth just as beads. You
Yeah.
made cloth beads or something. have
Again,
you?
gauze.
Gauze beads.
Gauze.
Okay.
And cloth also I've used differently in my paperwork. Some of them you have
Yes.
shown,
Yes.
like a piece of cloth as a bold line or something like that.
So obviously the process is extremely important for you because it's the process that drives
That is
your
the
work,
play,
isn't
no?
it?
That is the play.
Right.
By combining different materials and mediums, that is my, that has become my arena now.
So if you don't work with a predetermined image or some kind of framework or some kind of a sketch, is how difficult it is really, or how easy it is to stop and say that this is the work?
Like Andre Breto and Andre Masson, they innovated this automation or automatic drawing and
Yes.
things. Like my work is also like an automation kind of thing. Automatically I rendered them with pencils and things like that. But it is not based on that surrealistic process of conscious and subconscious method. But it is a natural, perhaps it is consciously I am using that process called automation. So it is not very new, and most of the artists, I believe, that it's every stroke is not determined. It comes automatically. You know, that is the beauty of it. It is not programmed. There is no software behind his mind, in his mind. It comes through his life, through his experience. Even the use of thick and thin paint, that is also part, it becomes very important part of the language.
So let us talk about your the most recent works, which you are doing on magazine paper, on glossy sheets. You are using markers, and
Yes.
these are permanent markers?
These are, nowadays we get all kinds of markers and paint marker, oil-based paint marker and water-based paint marker and things like that, because now it has happened like the revolution has happened in communication, you know, like IT and things. Same thing I believe is happened in writing instruments. All kinds of things. Even I have a white ballpoint pen, you know, one of the works was done with that. So uh, like
No, but what are you intending to do in these works? Because I was asking myself when I looked at these works, there is an interesting thing that is happening where you are again camouflaging. Okay, but is there a relationship? Are you trying to build a relationship between what is given and what you are adding to it, or is it just a play of a kinesthetic hand gesture that just moves and gives
actually
joy? What is it?
there was no intention behind all those works. Now this art making or whatever, painting and drawing, it has become part of my system, part of my like biological system,
Habit
say,
now.
or whatever habit. So there, and to tell you, art, when an artist creates a work of art, it is always a very private affair. Later on it comes to the public domain. But at the time of creation, it is not at all a performing art or anything. It always remains very private. Even after, when it comes to the public domain, even the artist sometimes surprised that, oh, I have created, or maybe it is. I mean, it gives him a kind of surprise.
Himmat does that all the time throughout this retrospective. Every time he has come to his own retrospective, he says, "ये मैंने बनाया, ये तो मैं बना ही नहीं सकता हूँ मैं, ये तो कैसे बन गया है किसी और."
That is the beauty of it.
So he's always surprised and amazed and marvels that how can it be that he did it? But yeah, this gets back to the whole idea of the enigma that we were talking. This whole enigmatic thing called art. Okay, that it is interesting when it is not over articulated. It is also interesting and it holds its own mystery when it is not overstated, as you said. And it has this kind of an enigmatic life that continues to haunt us, though we may have not. And I think it is good not to understand the work at one go. What really comes to us very slowly is more, stays with us more, and stays with us longer, I feel. If anything comes very immediately to you, it also goes very immediately. This is my feel about it. And I think with this, we will just open this up for a lot of questions and comments, and Ashok ji can add something before we just...
Fine.
Just last.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a poem of Shakti Chattopadhyay. There he said, I don't know about the artist or who, the line is in Bengali, Chobi aanke aar chhide phele. Chhabi banata hai aur phir phad deta hai. So this is the process. We also, like, first when we start our work, we start it differently, then actually we eliminate it. Then something new emerges.
Yes.
Well, now is the time for you to offer brief comments or ask questions. They should be brief, possible witty. Let someone ask the first one, then it goes on, because then others take courage later. Someone has to shoot the first one.
The first arrow.
And don't ask questions like, what toothpaste do you like, or did you see this serial, and all those. Those questions are not allowed. But question about what you have heard, and question about art that you might have known.
I think
Yes,
ROOBINA
please.
has really articulated the whole thing so well that it's really left no. That's okay. No, I just said that ROOBINA has articulated the whole thing so well that it's really it doesn't leave any chance for questioning, I think. But anyway, I think.
Very.
No,
Giti has a question.
I have so
Anyway,
many.
go ahead.
I'm just a teaser. I mean, it's
Good.
teaser meaning I'm hoping it'll bring up more questions, not teasing you, Amita, or ROOBINA, for that matter. You talked about wit just now, Ashokji, and I wanted to say preferably witty, you said. But this matter has come up when I've looked at Amitabh's work earlier. But let me confine myself to one simple question. I hope it's simple, though no question is really simple. firstly, do you finish a work at one go, or do you work, this is process, or do you work on several things together? I mean, are you totally involved in one work and then you finish it? Maybe it takes you a day, a week, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't want to elaborate the mystery of how it's done, but how are you totally involved in your energy? Because there's a lot of energy that comes out of your work. Thank you.
Actually, I work in several canvases or in several sketchbooks together. So sometimes, one come across where it is very difficult to proceed. So then I start the other work. So it opens up the problem of the first work and things like that, no? So this is my process. Like I work on several works together at the same time. And I won't be able to tell you how much time it takes, but I am not a very slow worker also, slow painter. But I go on working in several formats and several canvases together.
But you're fortunate here because they say about Leonardo da Vinci that he was such a restless creative mind that he would start a painting, and by the time that he had started doing some work, his ideas would have moved. So he could never go back to complete his painting, the previous one. And that's how several of his works have remained incomplete. Because he could never go back. He had moved on. But yes,
He worked on several fields, on science, on
He
flying
did, yes,
machine,
he
so
did.
that was also there.
Yeah, he brought all that.
It's
in
not
some
just
way.
paintings.
Yeah, in some way together, yes.
Yes?
Who else? Yes, Gayatri ji.
Sorry, this is not witty at all, but it's just two perhaps interrelated questions. One is about your use of blackness, darkness, and the shades of darkness that you seem to have developed. I think sometimes in a painting you have pointed out that there are at least 4 kinds of black. So perhaps if you could just shed a little light on this. The other thing that I find very interesting is in this transmutation of a literary or a poetic imagination from one part of India to another, in this case Bengal. So Shakti Chattopadhyay or Jivananda Das, the Naxalite movement, they all become a sort of a field for you to develop, play, interpret. I'm interested in this because very often maybe painters in Calcutta don't respond in quite the same way, but here there is this very strong, passionate and poetic response from living quite far away to events that happen somewhere else. And this somewhere else-ness, the language that you develop for it.
Like in 1970, those Naxalism was the peak, all kinds of things were happening. And also that time, Che Guevara emerged in India, like he wrote a book, When We Shall Win, and in Delhi also, like we used to go to the coffee house at that time, and we had like-minded people, we used to discuss all these things, and that time in Bengal, poetry movement started very strongly. Even like every day they used to bring out one small 1 or 2 pages poetry magazine every day. Even this was also started, and some of the even painters they were also involved. Like Prakash Karmokar was illustrating Shakti Chattopadhyay's work, and that book used to available in 25 paisa at that time. This kind of movement started, and lots of little magazine, and also like a kind of grim and atmosphere is there. I mean, it was very difficult to discuss openly about all those violent things which were happening. That time Mrinal Sen made that Calcutta 70 also. It was based on of that situation. So these things affected us in different way. So that that is also the reason I have used black. I am using black in different shades or different intensities.
And sometimes so they look like completely oxidized fields. Black is almost becomes sculptural.
Yeah, it becomes
sculptural.
like
Yeah,
a
which is
explosive
what
or something like
yeah,
that. It is going to explode.
It has weight.
Yes.
You can feel the weight of it. That's what. It's
Yeah.
just like it carries that weight. Yeah.
Some of your works latterly had guns and weapons and a kind of a
Indications.
indication, which are very violent and sort of.
I think that reflects the time
Ah,
we are living in.
okay.
They also get very mechanical and robotic.
Yeah.
It's almost like in the
Gestural.
toy shops you see
Yeah,
these.
these
The robots,
gunmen and
and Supermen.
थोड़ा जोर से बोलिए.
So this is just a short acknowledgement. I am an IT professional, and I'm for the first time coming here and having listening to this discussion. And I have a very good interest towards theatre, towards music, towards art, towards visual art specifically. And this discussion is proving really, really informative for me. So thank you.
So there's some comment made about IT professionals who come
Yes.
and wonder about what is the meaning.
Bhaiya?
Yes? You want? Yeah. Prabhakar Korte, who's luckily here.
I would like to ask you, after having this experience for the last 4 decades, if I'm not wrong, how you look at yourself? That is one. Second thing is related to it. What do you think this painting has given to you?
To tell you frankly, I have not started looking at myself in the first hand. And the other thing is, it gave me nothing that way, painting. But when I see the works of mine, an amount of works, it also gave me a great, like I think that I have given something to the society.
No, can I just add
Yes,
something?
please.
I just want to add, it is like you have, again, not circumvented the idea of analyzing what it has given you. I'm sure that it has given you your life. Because otherwise, how do you really talk about yourself? If you separate your work or your art from your life, you might immediately feel that void.
Yeah, that way I think.
So it's because it is everything, you don't analyze it. Okay. If you went to a movie, you will come back talking, isme ye hua tha, your analysis will becomes a part, natural part, because it's a very small encounter, a very short encounter. Okay. But things that you do every day, which you breathe in and out, I think it just becomes a part of you, and therefore it's not separate of you to really.
Of course not. Yeah, it has
perhaps I don't think. I was just
at
thinking.
least a kind of sense is there in my life by creating all these things, and also you were talking about reaction and things like that, like about film. Like even visual art or a painting is used, like Tarkovsky, of course, used, like his cinema was also like a big canvas, like a painted canvas. But on the other way, there was a film called The Night of the Generals, where Peter O'Toole was there.
Yeah.
He was very, one weakness is there, and again he used to go to that thing. That was a Van Gogh self-portrait. And he used to stand there and after few seconds he used to get fainted.
I see.
So a great, I mean, this way, that film, this element is created through that painting. It's really a great, the reaction. He used to react in that. That was his weakness,
Completely
and he used to feel unconscious.
Anybody else? Or would you like to have last words? Or would you
I
like to
can't
say
say the
something?
last words will come from Amitabh.
I paint and then I just I tore the thing, like I tears them.
Have you ever thought if you were not an artist, what would you be? Has it ever crossed your mind that you could be something else?
It's difficult to trace out that.
Have you ever? Because there are
Must
some people
have
who
been,
say,
but
"Agar main
it's
ye nahi
very-
hota, to main ye hota." There are people
no,
who have
like-
ready-made answers. Do you?
like
I don't
in-
know. There are people.
We have a poem by Ravi Sahai.
हाँ.
Said, अगर कहीं मैं तोता होता तो क्या होता? No, so the answer is तोता होता.
That's witty, yes.
Well, so we come to the end of this evening. Thank you very much, Amitav Das and ROOBINA KARODE, for making this conversation very lively and illuminating about your work. And may I remind our friends in the audience that on 10th August we have Kelucharan Mahapatra Memorial Lecture to be delivered by Kumudni Lakhya. This will be at the Gulmohar Hall in the India Habitat Center. We have on 17th August Art Matters Here, in which Shubha Mudgal would be talked to by S. Kalidas. We have the Dayakrish Memorial Lecture, 8 Threats to Freedom of Expression, by the historian Ramchandra Guha on 10th September. This will again be in the Habitat Center. So you are all most welcome, and may I give you some parting flowers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
So, protocol, I should have given it to first.
Yes.